Hello and welcome to the 10th episode of our Bamboo Chalupa digital marketing podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the owner of Knucklepuck, and I am joined by my co-host, Nate Shiver, the author of shiverweb.com.
Hello, hello.
So for this, our 10th episode, Nate and I were talking about, kind of ideas that we wanted to share with our listeners. And we decided to go with a pretty, tried and true tradition in the SEO space, an annual tradition, if you will. And that's using our first episode or our first, a lot of folks do it with their first blog post or, first presentation, but talking about digital marketing and SEO in 2015. We want to talk about what happened in 2014, where our industry has where we have come over the past 12 months. And as we look forward into 2015, we're actually going to divert a little bit from the tradition that typically tells you how much different this new year is going to be from the previous year. But when Nate and I were actually talking about where SEO and digital marketing have come since the beginning of 2014, and now we look to 2015, we're actually noticing that we expect 2015 to be more of the same, but more of the same with bigger stakes.
Yeah, and so there were sort of four trends that we'll touch on. First off, we really learned that the way your website is built still matters. So with all the emphasis, and especially in the SEO world, about links and off-page signals, in 2014, we saw Google roll out SSL or HTTPS, having a secure website as a small, lightweight, but growing ranking signal. We saw them put a bigger emphasis on user experience. We saw, there's some really interesting industry studies going around about how click-through rate in the search results and also bounce rate from your website back to the search results can impact your ranking, and how Google is coming up with really advanced ways of looking to see how your website is structured and whether or not it's user-friendly. And so what this means is that as much as marketers want to put the emphasis on marketing, your website infrastructure has really become a necessary competitive advantage. When you're choosing your platform, when you're doing the boring, tedious, seemingly pointless back-end choices, of how your website's built, what CMS it runs on, what's the information architecture, those choices can impact what your marketing strategy can do once your website is launched or as it grows.
And really, this kind of comes down to exactly what we always talk about when we talk about the technical area of SEO. And it comes down to having a strong foundation. This idea that you can create good content or content is king and, link building is dead and all these other kind of phrases that you hear, that still doesn't take away from the fact that a strong technical foundation, an appropriate hierarchy of pages, a taxonomy of how you organize your content, all of that is still essential in terms of allowing the search engines to evaluate your content and evaluate your brand in a way that will support your other digital marketing initiatives.
Yeah, we're all going to have to become developers, so to speak. I love how even the president is pushing, Code Academy for everyone to not necessarily become a developer, but learn enough code to understand what's going on behind the scenes. I think that's going to just become even more important. I love I forget who wrote it, but the awesome blog post about how marketers have to become technical, or at least technical to a degree, to understand what's going on.
And it all kind of comes back together towards the same goals that we're trying to accomplish.
Oh, yeah.
Our copy does not get read by search engines. Our copy doesn't perform well. It doesn't matter if it's the greatest copy or the worst copy. If it can't be read by search engines, it's not even in the game. So we have to make sure that technical infrastructure is in place before we're really able to go and build on that with any on-page or off-page initiatives.
Yeah, speaking of copy, that segues into the other trend is that in 2014, we saw even more so that it's not necessarily what you say with your copy or with your website, it's about what you mean. Keywords are dead. The whole Google hasn't been giving us our keyword data in quite a while. But really, when we talk about keywords are dead, we're talking about that the semantics or the meaning behind the keywords, the questions that people are asking via keywords are what's king now. And that search engines are doing a better job about understanding it. Google rolled out the Hummingbird algorithm, which basically they said is going to have the same search results or better search results, but it's going to process queries in a more natural language type way, which trying to decipher what's the intent, what's the question behind the keyword. And I think that, the search results are going to continue to evolve because of those type changes, with bigger focuses on the knowledge graph and less focus on, the traditional SEO stew of throwing some keywords, throwing some links, and see who wins.
And I'm glad you bring up things like Google taking away our keyword data and, and Hummingbird specifically, if we do focus in on Google, because this has been a focus for Google going back towards the end of 2013. Hummingbird was released in September of 2013. Not Provided went 100% in October of 2013. We said this at the end of last year, where the writing is on the wall in terms of where search engines expect us to go in terms of crafting our website strategies to be able to more closely align with the user intent. I love the way that you said that, Nate, that it's not what you say, it's what you mean. One of the other phrases our listeners might be familiar with is this idea that search engines are looking for strings, not things. It's really focusing in on the semantics of what a search query in its entirety really means. What is a user seeking to gain by typing in that word or phrase into the search engine? That is what the engines are trying to return for you in their results. They're not trying to return the page that has the most references to that keyword on it. They're trying to return the page that most closely aligns with the user intent behind actually typing that phrase into the engine. Remember, it is a search engine. You are searching for resources. You are searching for results. What this really means is that Google in Yahoo and Bing are all moving towards a model where they want to understand exactly why you are searching and what you are searching for, as opposed to what you are searching with.
Yeah, I think, you think about even a broad term like hotels in Atlanta, that could mean a very, very different thing and have very different intent if you're searching for that term on your smartphone in an airport that, when you just got off a plane, than it would if you were at your house at your desktop computer, where at the airport, you're looking for a place to stay right now and you just want a hotel. Whereas if you're at home, you're on your desktop computer, you might be looking around, you want to see review sites, you want to see comparison sites. And that's the kind of factors that they're already taking into account and is only growing. It grew in 2014, it's going to grow in 2015. And I think not only are we going to see keywords really kind of dying off, but audiences are going to be the search volume of all these different keywords is going to become even more longer tailed in the jargon. So basically you're going to have fewer of these blockbuster, huge volume terms that everyone wants to rank for, and more of these terms where, to use the example I just gave, hotels in New York, that used to be one term that there was one set of search results, but now that's going to be really multiple terms, a really infinite variety of terms that you could rank for given device, given location, given personalized browsing history, given everything else. And so it's going to be harder to optimize for that in some ways, but also easier if you really think about what's your website for, who are you targeting.
And what's interesting about that, when you talk about all these different kind of variations of how a word or phrase might be interpreted, that will lend to almost increased competition. We talk about this idea that the SEO world gets increasingly saturated every year because people start to recognize the importance, they start to recognize the value of visibility in a search engine, and are willing to invest increased time and resources into acquiring that visibility. And so when you're talking about some of these phrases, you're really talking about understanding specifically where it is that you have your competitive advantage. And so we're really kind of talking about this area in terms of SEO and digital marketing that we're kind of called the squishy middle, where there's just extreme competition of people who are either unwilling or unable to do the research to recognize exactly where your competitive advantage is, exactly who your audience is and what they're looking for. So instead you go for these broad generic terms that are extremely saturated, that there's a lot of companies and a lot of varied companies. You have content resources. You may have, B2C companies. You may have B2B companies. You may have search engines that are specific to this industry that are helping people find other products or services. This competition in the middle is really is really forcing us as marketers to understand who our audience is, because we can't necessarily compete there anymore. It's not as easy to be able to rank for a broad generic term by writing a piece of content with an exact match URL. There are rewards here for either very early adoption, being the first person to recognize the importance of a word or phrase, or this idea of, flawless execution. We talked about it a little earlier in one of our earlier episodes, rather, about this idea that you can still be successful to these broad queries if you were able to create the very best resource, this flawlessly executed, dependable, comprehensive resource. That's not necessarily feasible for a lot of businesses to invest that kind of time and resources. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding this, extremely competitive, mushy middle that we talked about, and start to consider new opportunities to get in front of people. Start to try to look for that bleeding edge. Try to do promoted pins on Pinterest. We talked about those with our paid amplification episode. Think about promoted pins, or really revisiting ways to engage your email subscribers. Stay away from just trying to get Facebook likes or just trying to get retweets. Because the other thing that we're learning as our world gets more saturated is that a business's reach on some of these digital platforms, Facebook and Twitter being two of the greatest examples, is basically zero now. Unless you have one of those super, super engaged and super strong social profiles, your reach is almost negligible now. You really don't have the opportunity to reach people in the same way by doing just the same basic best practices. So you need to start finding ways to differentiate yourself from the crowd and really push yourself to a place where the search engines can recognize your unique and independent value add and how that aligns with what a user might be searching for when they go to the search engine.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about how what you call the squishy middle really applies to Facebook, Twitter, some of the bigger social platforms, because I think it's not just increased competition. It's also the internet, ever since it started, it lends itself to fragmentation, where everyone goes off and joins their little tiny niche community. And I think we've been kind of living in an anomaly of an era where, with Facebook and Twitter for this, 4-year period of the internet, you could magically reach all those fragmented little niche audiences through Facebook and Twitter. And with their reach going away, I think it's going to be whoever can figure out how to reach these small audiences at scale, or really own the audience that they already have and grow that organically from within, are going to be the brands, the businesses that really succeed.
And one of the other trends that we started to recognize, towards the end of 2014 that we expect to continue into 2015 is the idea that spam fighting and improving the quality of their results is becoming even more of a core focus for these search engines. My grandmother had a phrase that passed on to my mother, that is passed on to me, and now I'll pass on to our listeners here. Whereas this phrase, it just goes very simply, cheat, no beat. If you're willing to go out there and all these kind of black hat tactics and all these different spam tactics that used to be ways to cut corners, yeah, it may have worked for a while, but eventually you're not going to beat the system with these tactics. Sooner or later, the system will evolve to a point where these tactics and these loopholes are closed. And so when we talk about this, in terms of search, we always talk about what they're doing in terms of improving the quality of their results, but really looking specifically at some of the things that they've done in 2014, it's not that black hat is going away entirely, especially for some of the spammier verticals. But it doesn't work, not necessarily because the tactics are that different. It's just cost prohibitive. At this point, it's too expensive to pursue black hat tactics, and it's too risky that the ROI on using these types of approaches is really being reduced to zero. And that's by very specific and very explicit moves by the search engines to, like I said, close some of these loopholes and make it more difficult to manipulate their results.
Yeah, there was an interesting blog post a few weeks ago, and we'll link to it in the show notes because I can't remember who wrote it, but they were basically laying out the economics of private blog networks, which are currently the tactic that is quote unquote working in the Black Hat community, where when you add up, the cost of hosting and of writers and even just domain names, when you add all that up and you add up, just the sheer amount of hours and work and tracking that it takes to remove your footprint from Google and their Penguin 1.0, Penguin 2.0 updates, like Brett said, it's the economics just don't really work unless you're in some of those really, really profitable verticals like payday loans, Viagra, those type verticals, which I think have really kind of become a case in and of themselves. And I think that a lot of the shadier SEO firms are going to continue to go away, especially sadly because a lot of them switched over to link cleanup in the aftermath of Penguin. And I think now that era is kind of coming to a close, that it will kind of be a brave new world for SEO moving into a post Panda, post Penguin world.
Right. And we talk about Panda and Penguin a lot. They've obviously been the focus for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
And you look at 2014, there were 2 more named Panda updates in 2014. And after it originally launched in 2011, there was another named Penguin update, again, originally launched in 2011. And there were 2 more payday loan updates, which we don't talk about as much, but these very specifically targeted your spam verticals, your online Viagra, your online casinos, your, porn, other payday loans, which is why they gave it the payday loan update. These niches that are very historically just overrun by spam. There were 2 more updates, the original launching at the end of 2013, specifically around the payday loans algorithm updates. And so the search engines really, and those are Google examples, but obviously Bing's are less publicized and Yahoo's even less so. But we talk about this idea that these search engines are making very concerted efforts to continue to make it difficult for their results to be manipulated, or at least, again, to use the phrase I used early, to make it cost prohibitive to pursue those sort of tactics and really get people to kind of build for the network that you wish existed, because that is the network that Google and Yahoo and Bing are striving for. And if you can stay in front of those trends and avoid things like these black hat tactics, remembering what my grandmother said, that cheat, no beat, eventually those things will catch up to you. And the pace by which they will catch up to you has been increasing over 2014 and will continue to increase in 2015.
It's interesting that you mentioned Yahoo and Bing. I know I especially have a bias towards Google, but I think one thing we're going to see in 2015 is that Yahoo and Bing might actually become something worth paying attention to. I mean, Yahoo has had their new CEO, Marissa Mayer, who actually came from Google for, I believe, a couple years now. And they recently struck a deal with Firefox to become the default search provider for Mozilla Firefox browsers. And I think that Bing, while they're struggling, I think they actually might be struggling enough to actually hand more of the reins over to Yahoo, which is seemingly getting much better focus and has publicly made search a large priority for the company. I think that, especially in the lower end of the market, that even though right now, in some verticals, they might have 10%, in some, that I think they're up to 30%. And I think that's something that might grow in addition to the other competitors that Google is having that we've talked about in previous episodes.
Right. And not to get too much into the, the whispers and gossip, but there have been rumors floating around that Bing would be potentially considering selling their search technology. And the number one person that pops up with that, obviously comes back to Yahoo. You look at the 2 biggest competitors kind of really trying to get on the same page to go after Google. Again, not to start the rumor mill here, but there have been people speculating on if and potentially when that might take place, given how much Bing has kind of underperformed their expectations, now having invested, a considerable amount of money in marketing and advertising and, in product development around their search engine without seeing the results that I think anybody had expected in terms of knocking Google out of that number 1, market share. But I agree with you that I think Yahoo and Bing are worth paying attention to, but I also think these other channels are also worth paying attention to. We've talked at length about, social media, Facebook in particular. We did an entire episode on YouTube, being able to have a presence on YouTube, which is the second largest search engine. If you're in e-commerce, we talk about things like being present on Amazon. Right now, it's not necessarily just that your advertising, your marketing budget should focus specifically on Google. Because while they still may be the market share, they are not a monopoly. They do not have an exclusive hold on your audience. And you need to make sure that, as you guys have heard us say over and over and over again on the show, your goal as marketers needs to be where your audience is. If your audience is now leaving Google for lack of, quality results, or they don't feel that they are getting the visibility that they need to go pursue visibility on some of these other platforms, I think we have to make sure that we continue to consider Yahoo and Bing, that we consider Facebook as a search engine or Twitter as a search engine. Twitter now has been working on some new technology that allows you to search all of your tweets that have ever been posted to Twitter. It's up in the air in terms of the immediate implications of that. But when you think about this opportunity to be able to access information in places that are not your traditional sources, AKA Google, we have to know as marketers to be able to not get caught on our heels here and say, all of a sudden, if people start to leave, or this Firefox really does, Firefox running Yahoo really does become something that is hugely damaging to Google's, dominance in search. We have to make sure that we are prepared for that, and that we're always considering what the impact of these alternative search engines, again, Yahoo, Bing, social media, e-commerce search engines, video or other multimedia, everything like that. We have to be considering the world beyond Google, because sooner or later, even if they still hold the market share, sooner or later, just by basic economic principles, there will be competition, and that competition will look to try to find ways to chip away at at that market share. And if you can continue to chip away, and as more people start to be willing to take on the search giant, you want to be in the early adopters for those engines as well. You want to make sure that there is no ceiling here. Optimizing for Google is not mutually exclusive from optimizing for Yahoo and Bing. So we need to be paying attention to these alternative sources, and we need to recognize the potential that they have to grow our businesses in 2015 and looking forward 2016 and beyond.
Speaking of Google not doing a very good job and losing out to other competitors, I think that'll especially be applicable to any business that has a local presence. Back in 2008, there was a marketing buzzword that came out called SOLO-MO, and it was supposed to be the year of social, local, and mobile.
And anybody who watches Silicon Valley, which is a hysterical show on HBO, they actually had an episode where everybody's doing their pitches, and they just did that montage of everybody describes their product as, I can help improve SOLO-MO. We are low-mo-so. We are low-so-mo. We are mo and low, and just on and on and on. Because it has been something that has become almost a comical buzzword. I think calling it just an old buzzword is a perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, it really is. And what's sad is that it's still relevant today, because it's something that even Google, who's building like deep AI engines and driverless cars, they still have trouble with attribution in the local world or the physical world, mobile world, and especially in social. I know we've both recently been doing a lot of work with Google local search results, and it's really just astounding at the struggle search engines have, and then also users who are increasingly turning to Google to find local businesses, and local businesses trying to connect with audiences, and that tension and that really struggle. And I really don't see it being resolved in 2015. Google was supposed to resolve it with their Pigeon update in 2014, but I have not. I don't know about you, Brett, but I haven't really seen an improvement at all.
I honestly think Pigeon was a massive step back. Yeah. For Google. I think that when Google migrated, think about all the changes that their local platform has gone, and even in the last few years. We had Google Places, and then we had Google Plus Local. or we had Google Local, then we had Google Places, then we had Google Plus Local, and now we have Google for Business or Google My Business. And Pigeon launched sometime in, I believe it was around July, right?
Yeah.
July or August of 2014. And that was designed to reevaluate how search engines, or how Google specifically evaluates local results in the context of your overall organic results. Meaning, one of the easiest kind of explanations for that is if you rank number one organically, Google doesn't necessarily think it's valuable to also show you number one in the local results. Now, for me as a consumer, I think that's absurd because I think there's something very different when I'm used to seeing things that are local results. Maybe I want a phone number. Maybe I want to know that this is someone. I want to see an address that validates that they're in my location. That having that number one organic listing is not something that is going to be what I'm looking for based on how familiar I am with, their local platform. I've had clients that have had their local listing completely disappear, doing everything right. 45 minutes on the call with a Google representative telling me that we've done everything right, that they're curating reviews authentically, they're responding to reviews, they have social engagement on the page, it's 100% complete, that they've written an optimized but not overly optimized description of their business, that they've added images, that they've added videos, and they're nowhere to be found. And this has been a frustration of mine. And Nate, and I know you and I have talked about this, offline quite a bit, where this idea that Google can't handle local is really astonishing to me based on the level of insight they have into overall user behavior, and that the local platform, especially Google My Business, has been just such a massive step back that it makes me wonder if they are really setting themselves up for long-term failure when people start to seek other options for their local results. Because as a consumer and as a marketer, I have found that the local platform has just been atrocious.
Oh yeah, I mean, we actually should do an entire show on just local, and it's a perfect example about how users aren't beholden to Google and how you have to find your users where they're at. I mean, if everyone is leaving Google Local and they're clicking over to Yelp, or they're clicking over to Facebook Places, that's, good example of where you have to be and what kind of changes you have to be aware of.
And it's a good example of how search engines, how these giants in any industry start to lose their dominance. You start to have you start to compromise on one section of this, and then a competitor swoops in that specializes specifically on that. That's what we were talking about before. We want to focus on not just Google, and it's also not just your traditional search engines. Yelp is a huge competitor when it comes to, to local. And people are starting to go directly to Yelp to look for their information and bypassing Google entirely because their results are so bad. And I think that's something that is very important for us to remember and to recognize that we've still got a long way to go. We've come a long way in the now, 17, 18 years since Google launched. We've come a long way in over that time, come a long way in 2014. But Google still just does not understand local, not the way that they need to. And I'd argue that Yahoo and Bing aren't much better. There's not the search volume there. Beyond that, Google doesn't understand social either. The Google Plus, the ongoing Google Plus experiment has been something that in no way accomplished what Google's, executives in the big boardroom really hoped that it would. Because engagement on Facebook and Twitter is up. Emerging social networks like Pinterest and even, your more traditional ones like Tumblr still have strong audiences. Reddit has a great way for people to be able to find information now. And when Google let that social element get away from them, my concern is that as we look to 2015 and beyond, if Google doesn't really get a handle on local, they are going to start getting to a point where it is almost impossible for them to recover because somebody else will come in and find a way to do this better. Because right now, Google doesn't understand local. They don't understand social. We talked about this idea of attribution where, people are multi-channel, multi-device, want their information here, now, when they want it. And there's a lot of flaws in terms of where Google and even your other traditional search engines are when it comes to doing marketing in 2015.
Let's quickly run through what to do in 2015. I'll kick things off with saying that you have to invest in an incredible foundation. And if you don't have an incredible foundation, to get it fixed like now, before 2015. Because I think it's if you think of your website like a car, sooner or later the car is going to get old and it's not going to function properly anymore. And sure, you can do without the luxuries of Bluetooth or heated seats, but you can't live without power steering or anti-lock brakes or the actual engine. And you have to figure out whether or not it makes sense to make improvements to the existing car or simply to buy a new one, if it's slowly breaking down. Either way, whether it means replacing the engine or going out and buying a new car, it's absolutely expensive, but it's going to beat sitting on the roadside broken down. And I think that's going to be an expensive but absolutely vital step for websites in 2015. I mean, people have been building websites and doing development for a very, very long time. And the way people build modern websites in 2014 and now in 2015 is just unimaginably better than the way they were built in 2000, 2001, 2003, even in 2007. I mean, the advances in software are incredible. And so I think that's going to be something to really, really think about, really plan for, and really invest in. And
I have two things that I would add to that. One, now that we have a new calendar year, figure out when your busiest time of the year is, your busiest season is. E-commerce, we're starting to wrap up right now. B2B, your busiest times are often Q1, where people have renewed budget. Recognize where your busiest time is in 2015, and then the quarter after that, make a very concerted effort to evaluate critically your website and determine whether you need to invest in improvements to the existing one or to consider replacing it entirely. Where this is not something that you should wait until it's a problem. You shouldn't wait until you're driving through a dark, headlightless road to have that car break down. You want to make sure that you're taking a very critical inventory of your website, and you're doing that after your busy season, so it gives you the longest possible time before your next busy season. Assuming you have a, kind of a seasonal calendar where it's a certain time of the year where things start to peak. Once that busy season ends, take that critical look at it and say, what do we need to do so that you're not in a position where you're making changes during your next busy season? And the other thing, and this has been common, almost repetitive advice, but it does, merit saying again here. If you are going to make any changes to your site or you're going to consider a new one, make sure that it's responsive. Make sure that that site is able to appear the same way, or at least is able to, appear the correct way on whatever device your audience chooses to use. And you can see that in Google Analytics. They will tell you the types of devices, but people are getting to the, just the searching audience in general is becoming much, much more multi-device and want to be able to have a similar or consistent experience across all of their devices, or make sure that any changes you make to your website keep that mentality, front of mind.
Yeah, the other thing to do in 2015 is to really find your real competitive advantage, what really sets you apart. Don't compete in what we call the chunky, hyper-competitive, squishy middle that everyone else is competing for. The entire world is becoming more specialized and more globalized. You see it, especially in verticals like doctors and attorneys. You hardly ever see a doctor who's a generalist. Now, you have a doctor who all he does is kidneys for people over 60, or you have children's cancer doctors. You have incredible specialization for doctors, for attorneys, for all these different occupations. And I think you're going to increasingly see it for small businesses and for publishers. You're really going to have to drill down and find what you're really good at and how can you focus your entire business, focus your entire website around that. That doesn't mean that you can't grow and expand out from there, but I think not having that defined should be on the to-do list for 2015.
And it doesn't mean that you neglect some of the, some of the broader focuses. It doesn't mean that you completely say, oh, well, I want to be the leader in kidney surgeries for women over 60. It's not saying that you ignore men over 60 or women under 60, but you want to make sure that whatever you find is your specialization, where is your true and objective competitive advantage, that's where you want to invest more of your time. You want to make sure that you're not putting yourself in a position where you end up being average because you try to do too much. You want to be extraordinary. Even if it's at a very niche, part of your business or subset of your business, you want to be extraordinary. And when you're extraordinary at one thing, then you start to create that flywheel that we've talked about a number of times where you can be extraordinary at two things by extension of that first thing. That with what you've learned about your audience from being extraordinary on those first two things, allow you to better serve them in the other more kind of fringe aspects of your business. So we don't want to ignore these complementary sides of your business here, but we do want to make sure that we embrace this idea of specialization and that we allow ourselves to really double down on our true competitive advantage so that we can then build on that and expand from there to be able to apply those learnings and those advantages to other aspects of our marketing.
Lastly, I would say, in addition to your competitive advantage, is to really outline and invest in your brand. I think brand has, ever since it really came about in the modern world, it's been sort of a squishy, odd concept. But I would argue that offline and especially online, the way people perceive you and the way people think about your business and your products is basically all you have. And so you're going to have to learn how to communicate better to your users, communicate better to your audience. That could be via social, video, content marketing. It could be whatever your marketing is, but making sure that everything is around that brand voice. And actually, next episode, we're going to be talking about the specific topic. Building a brand is an investment that's going to pay off not only for your current audience, but it's also something that helps you stand out on social. It helps you stand out on search engines because brands not only help people recognize who you are and what products you are, but it also builds authority and trust among people who don't currently buy from you.
I like this idea of talking about brands as they relate to authority because that is how search engines really evaluate authority. They have to look at the strength of your brand, the different signals associated with that, the type of content that you write and who you write it for, where you get your links and what types of resources you get your links from. All of this idea of that your brand is your authority. And when we know that authority drives rankings, rankings drive traffic, traffic drives conversions, if we accept that basic, progression of how your audience reaches your website, it really stands to reason that this idea of a strong brand is going to drive stronger users and a weak brand is going to drive weaker users. Driving traffic really is not that difficult. In this day and age, it's really not that difficult to simply drive traffic to your website if that's your only goal. But if your goal is to drive qualified traffic, to use your website as an extension of your business or as the primary face of your business, if you were built and bred online, if you're using your website as a foundational pillar of your business strategy, the idea of investing in your brand to curate stronger authority signals allows you to attract a more qualified audience, an audience that is not only going to be more valuable in the short term, but the lifetime value of that audience that really has a strong connection and association with your brand is extraordinarily higher than somebody who is simply going through and saying, oh, well, I recognize this, or I did a search, it was the first one that popped up. That's still valuable, but it's not something that is going to be driving the majority of your long-term growth. It's not going to be from these fly by the seat of your pants people. When you talk about anything, if you think about it in terms of a consulting business or a service business, the best customers are your recurring customers. So you're not always investing the time to be able to bring somebody in the first time. This idea of investing in your brand is getting you repeat customers. It's getting you a reputation that people know what to expect from the quality of your product or service, and that becomes a competitive advantage for you. So we want to make sure that we're investing in our brand and that we're investing in the continuous growth of our brand based on the evolving needs of our users.
Take advantage of 2015. Me and Brett actually have two different approaches that we're going to be kind of taking in 2015. We end up at the same spot, which is a better brand, better website, more revenue. But I like to think of, or at least how I'm going to be planning out 2015 with my projects is going to be what I call the barbell approach. So that's where, and I'm stealing this from the investing world. So barbell is where you have all your money in either super conservative investments or super risky investments. And the idea is that they balance each other out. So my barbell marketing strategy would be to pick one channel that you really know and understand. That might be PPC, that might be SEO, email, whatever you understand, whatever's driving revenue, and become world class and have absolute focus on that. Now, you might pick up other things in the course of being world class in SEO. You might pick up more UX, more security, but the idea is to not be distracted by all the other things that you could be doing. And then the other thing is to pick one, what I call bleeding edge or I wouldn't call it a risky marketing strategy, but something new, something where you can be a true early adopter. That might be finding a social amplification tool, one of the ones that we talked about last week, or just some other channel that you think your audience is moving to that you can excel at, and learning that, becoming the early adopter, defining the best practices on that platform. And by having that two-pronged approach, you won't be what I would call distracted and choosing the latest shiny bauble and all the different things that you can be doing in marketing while still building your brand, building your website, building your audience through what you already know and what's upcoming.
And while Nate's on the other side of the gym hitting the barbells, I actually like to take what I call more of a CrossFit strategy. I want to focus on a series of foundational exercises. So user engagement, copywriting, content marketing, outreach, conversion rate optimization, but any kind of series of foundational exercises that allow you to kind of strengthen your core and position your website to excel at any variety of individual disciplines. So let's use SEO as an example. We're SEO or social media. We did a 3-part series on social media, and we started that off with what Marty Weintraub said, that social media is not a strategy. Social media is a tactic. Ultimately, it becomes a tactic to be able to accomplish your overall strategic goals. And the CrossFit strategy focuses on enhancing the individual tactics so that you can apply those to a variety of different strategies. So user engagement is going to be valuable for trying to attract links. It's going to be valuable in terms of creating on-page copy that engages with those users. It's going to be valuable in terms of enhancing your social presence. With the CrossFit strategy, I want you to really focus on the things that allow you to accomplish your goals, as opposed to just trying to say, I want more traffic or I want to do SEO. Think about what powers SEO, what powers social media, what powers content marketing, and focus on those foundational exercises so that you can apply those learnings and apply those tactics in a way to accomplish very, very specific goals that you set for your business. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on the same thing looking to 2015 as we were looking into 2014, as we were looking into 2013. As Larry Page and Sergey Brin were looking into 1997 and the start of Google. And when you think about all the big and small changes that search engines have made over the past year and over the past 10 years, they continue to follow a very, very common theme and a very obvious theme. And that is that we want to serve the user. The user is always first and foremost when it comes to digital marketing, because the barriers to entry and the barriers to change are very, very, very small. It is extremely easy for somebody to click to just another website if your product becomes subpar. It's very easy for somebody to go and type in a different keyword or go and do a different search or refine or expand their search using a couple of additional keystrokes. We have to make sure that we can interpret and we can understand what it is the user is hoping to accomplish, because it's our starting point. And from there, we back out to understand what tactics do we need to use to be able to engage that user? What is our strategic goals for engaging that user using these tactics? And then ultimately, how is that going to allow my business to be more successful? Because the users, we can call them users, we can call them visitors, we can call them customers. But as much as they power the search engine, the users at the other end of the computer also power the online side of your business, because these are the folks that are going to be your ultimate conversions. These are the folks that are going to be able to say, did your website make you or lose you money in 2015? And so we want to make sure that we remain focused on this end user, that we are hyper focused on what they are looking for and what they are hoping to accomplish, and that we can align our strategies to be able to accomplish those same goals. Because as we talk about in SEO all the time, in high tide, all ships rise. If the user is getting a better experience from your brand will experience better results because those users are more likely to share, they're more likely to promote and become brand ambassadors. And as you serve your user better, your user base will grow and will serve your business better.
All right, you can find previous episodes, links to things we mentioned, and our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. Next episode, we'll be talking with Evan Porter, who's the lead copywriter at Nebo Agency, and he's had his work featured in AskMen.com, Upworthy, Lifehack.org, the front page of Medium, the front page of Dig, and he's going to be talking with us about building an audience and brand voice from scratch. It was a really amazing episode to record. I took a lot of notes, and I think it will be really, really useful. So that you don't miss that episode, please subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and leave a comment and rating while you're there. It gives us great feedback and helps others discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shiver. Thanks for listening.